The number one mistake people managers make when employees ask for an inflation-adjusted raise. Well, that biggest mistake is not having a financial education to explain why inflation is a hidden tax versus a cost of living increase, making the employee think the business is just trying to screw them out of money. And the biggest problem really is that no one has a decent financial education. But a decent answer would be that we have a budget that we have to stick to in order to stay in business. And unfortunately, it isn't keeping up with inflation. But even then, that just angers the employee because neither of you has a solid financial education to understand what's really going on and who's really at fault as to why your paycheck isn't keeping up with the cost of living. So both boss and employees are pitted against each other, when in reality, they should be working together to end big government and the central banks. Inflation is a hidden tax on everyone, including your place of employment. The government overspends without any restraint on warfare, big pharma, welfare, and everything in between. In order to fund this without directly increasing taxes, the government needs the central bank to create more currency from nothing. This new currency pays the government bills first at the current value of the currency. As this currency works its way through the economy, the value of that currency becomes less and less valuable as it dilutes the supply of money. Think of a movie that everyone wants to see, but there's only 100 tickets in existence to see it. The value of those tickets spike in value because they are so rare for something everybody wants. Now multiply those tickets by 1,000. Those tickets now become worth much less because there are more of them. Central banks get to print the money out of thin air and get interest on that new currency it loaned to the government. This is why the national debt keeps growing exponentially while the government continues to grow bigger exponentially. The government gets to pay its debts and grow its power even more with dollars that are valued at its highest before they disperse it into the economy. Then you pay for it because if you printed money, you'd be thrown in jail, but you can't. The military-industrial complex, and more recently the medical-industrial complex, gets those dollars next at a slightly lesser value, but still strong. Then big corporations, then mom-and-pop businesses, then employees. You can see that you and your boss are at the bottom of the totem pole. By the time the business and the employee gets paid for the work that you do, the price of everything has gone up, and therefore, those dollars that you receive have decreased in value. So both you and your company need to raise your price. But unfortunately, that takes a lot of time, and by now, you've paid the tax for the government's frivolous spending. For instance, a VFX business has already locked into bids to do work between 1 to 2 years in advance. That means they need to raise prices on the next round of films. But right now, they have to stick to the budgets that were already agreed upon with those big studios, which also factors a standard merit increase for its employees. So when you, as an employee, want a larger raise to keep up with the cost of living and inflation, you have to wait for the next round of movie cycles so that your place of business can factor in the new price of its employees. It's a fine balance for VFX businesses to stay competitive to win the bid from the major studio, but high enough price to keep its employees from leaving. It's a never-ending cycle, but ultimately the business has to stick to their budget to give you the predetermined merit increase so that they don't go out of business and avoid everyone losing their jobs. And remember, those big studios have to also raise their prices eventually in order to pay for higher costs coming in the next year or two. So Disney Plus rates go up, Netflix goes up, theater tickets go up. And who's paying for that? You. Your dollars are now having to stretch much farther for those things. And now the government's bigger and the businesses and the employee are paying the hidden inflation tax for the warmongering and the power trip big governments keep perpetuating. So Lockheed Martin and Pfizer are reaping in record profits off the back of your labor and your employer's productive output. Supply chains also factor into inflation, among other things. And of course, the government is to blame for all of it. From the Trump tariffs in 2018 that Biden has kept rolling for the most part, to the COVID lockdowns of 2020 and 2021, to the Ukraine war that could have easily been avoided if we had smarter and less evil people involved in all sides. Less supply equals higher prices, so you have massive currency delusion compounded by decreased supply of energy and goods. This is a recipe for a higher inflation tax on all of us. Let's also not forget that the government has manipulated the data to make inflation seem less than it actually is. You'll see the talking heads on TV tell you that we haven't seen this kind of inflation since the 70s and early 80s. But the truth is, it's actually higher than it was back then. The reason is because they've removed the key data from the CPI that they used to factor in back then, like food and energy. Pretty important data that they've actually removed. When you factor in the CPI they used to calculate back in the 70s and 80s, the inflation rate is actually double, 17.3% right now. So the next time you ask your boss for an inflation-adjusted increase, just remember it's not them, it's your government and the central bank enablers. End the Fed, end big government, end big pharma, and the big war machine. We need peace, freedom, and real money like gold and silver that cannot be printed out of thin air to fund all of these catastrophes. Learn more about how you can keep up with and surpass inflation without asking your boss for an inflation-adjusted raise by joining my masterclass, where you'll learn guaranteed techniques to boost your income using other people's money, just like the government and the big banks do. Put yourself near the top of the totem pole, and let's win back our freedom. Check out the link below, right here, and I'll see you inside.